Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm presenting for Foundations of Environmental Science. This is my water project, testing specific conductance between urban and rural water bodies by Will Wisnet. The big idea is that urban development continues to encroach on the untamed wilds. These rural sources of surface water may one day not be so rural, and when we find a baseline variance of urban and rural surface water, we may be able to compare quality checks currently in place in these urban regions to create better planning and building practices as development continues. Continuing, termed as habitat exploitation, that's where humans encroach on the environment. One peer review paper discussed 12 concept stressors that are placed on the environment. That's e-commerce and invasion, infections and diseases, harmful algal blooms, expanding hydropower, emerging contaminants, engineered nanomaterials, microplastic pollution, light and noise pollution, freshwater salinization, declining calcium, cumulative stressors, and, of course, climate change. Another paper discussed how drain depth of water inflow and outflow systems have been able to detect measurable and predictable amounts of salinity in water. So through replicable tests, they were able to find that uh, water absorbs salinity through pipes and was able to find and predict how much based on how deep they were placed. Another paper spoke about the capabilities of comparing water bodies through satellite imagery and using um, algorithms to test and check the satellite imagery to their on-the-ground measurements, testing for dissolved solids, the total dissolved solids, electrical conductivity, salinity, and turbidity, and they found that most of their testing was accurate to the satellite imagery and could only get better through better imagery pictures, more pixelation, more pixelation, and using these concepts for the technology that we have today, we're able to hopefully find this baseline, and through that, we can develop better practices for real-time checking and monitoring for uh, during building projects or during conservation efforts. So what is the concern? And that concern is freshwater salinization syndrome. This is defined as salt pollution and human-accelerated weathering, where it links salinization and alkalinization to water contamination. And this is evident in high-density populations, uh, traffic, fuel and chemical spills, any kind of waste or disposal that can run off, that can meet our water, all contribute to this issue of freshwater salinization, which hurts biodiversity. My hypothesis is that a higher salinity count will be found in surface water within the defined limits of an urban environment. In order to test that, I found 20 samples or 20 lakes that I wanted to take samples from. I divided them to 10 rural and 10 urban uh, regions. Most of the rural samples were taken in Mountville, around LaGrange, up in Troup County, and then most of the samples taken in Columbus. For urban water, uh, was it taken within the city? I used Whirlpacks to collect these samples and place those in coolers separated by their definition, and I defined an urban environment as within the city limits and closely surrounded by homes for development, and a rural environment is defined as a location outside of city limits with no more than 3 homes in a nearby location to the identified water body. Also, possibly with agricultural or pastoral land nearby. You can see that these are the locations that I chose to take water from, and these are the codes that I used to help identify what the sample was. I used the YSI multi-parameter water quality tool uh, to check the salinity through specific conductance. I also made sure to calibrate the YSI system before I checked for the microsiemens and for temperature pH. The YSI self-corrects for conductance as if the temperature was taken at 25 degrees Celsius, which was necessary to get an accurate specific conductance measurement, and the measurements were taken in microsiemens. Also, to be more thorough, I took temperature and pH for each sample, just to have that information. A little background detail. An average over the past month of October for temperature has been in 25 degrees Celsius in Columbus, Georgia, and 24 degrees Celsius in LaGrange. Between the two regions where the samples were taken from were in middle and western Georgia, near the Alabama line. Precipitation in Columbus, Georgia for the month of October was an average total of 4.96 inches, and in LaGrange, the average total was 2.7 inches. So most of the water samples drawn were full of sediment and particles. There was a lot of stuff in it. Each of the samples had a color variance from less than clear to green tinted to brown. And this color variance was found in all the samples for both rural and urban water bodies. You couldn't visually identify which one was which. This is the full table of the temperatures, the specific conductance, the pH, and how it was broken down. You see the codes. Temperature variation is not very great, pretty much 19.5 degrees to 21 degrees Celsius. However, the specific conductance had a lot of variation. I'd like to point out the highest was 182 and the lowest was 14. And both of those are in the urban environments. And that changed a lot. Given that my hypothesis was that urban water would have a higher conductivity than the rural through salinization, this graph and table right here shows that there is no evidence to have any proof to my hypothesis. And as I pointed out, the 14 being the lowest and the highest being 182 in the urban areas, the urban environment, that shows that it completely encompasses all of the samples taken in rural. However, interestingly enough, the temperature taken shows statistical significance of a difference between the urban and rural water bodies. And this is possibly due to heat island effect, where temperatures rise in the urban environment due to the inability for warmth to be absorbed by its surroundings. You can see that the temperature for the urban environments was much more concise and a lot higher considering than the temperature for rural areas. To continue the discussion, the EPA says that the average uh, specific conductance would be 150 to 500 micromole per centimeter. And I measure mine in microsiemens, and this is equivalent. They're the same thing. And in this case, the measurements found in this exercise were mostly lower than the range presented by the EPA, all except for the one that was 182 or 8. The that is interesting, and that would be worth looking into, is find out if Columbus just has their management together, that all of their water bodies are fairly clean from specific conductance in their water systems. Some other data or other areas to look into for future would be that more data needs to be collected in order to have a better pool to gather information from. And in order to do that, you could have a more definitive buffer to identify and separate urban and rural water body sources. So, say 1 kilometer radius with no development, as opposed to houses being in the area. Uh, Also, I would say that we need to do more, have more states or cities within the state checked just to make sure that there is more data to bounce off of. Maybe Columbus is different from another smaller city specifically. But ultimately, I think that the takeaway from this shows that Columbus is ranked the third largest city in the state, both by population and by square area. And the water quality management practices in this city may be sufficient for environmental protection. This region may be able to be used as a benchmark study to observe measures taken in Columbus for water conservation to draw a comparison on urban development practices in other Georgia cities. Maybe the fact that my hypothesis wasn't correct isn't important. The important thing to take away is that the variance baseline between urban and rural water bodies has been found, and now we can take technology and use other means identified and known about in order to make sure that water is conserved and that the biodiversity of our water environments are taken care of. Thank you very much for joining us and showing up for the presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for your participation. If there's any questions, please let me know. Thank you.